Kotlin comes with many built-in data types and functions that you can use in your own apps to complete a variety of common programming tasks. This is known as the Kotlin Standard Library. You can think of the Kotlin Standard Library as a big box of books filled with code that you can use in your own apps. In fact, you've been using many elements from the Kotlin Standard Library already. The data types like int and string are all part of the standard library. The part of the library that includes these fundamental types and functions is included in your Kotlin project automatically. When you're developing your Kotlin-based app, you'll frequently want to use utilities from the Kotlin Standard Library rather than reinventing the wheel. But it's a big library, so how can you know what's available? Luckily, the Kotlin documentation available online is an amazing resource for getting to know what's available and how to use it. The documentation has a section dedicated to the Kotlin Standard Library and the packages contained in it. The documentation is definitely worth exploring as you follow along this learning path. Now, back in your app, you'll be changing the target value to use a randomly generated number. For this, you'll create a new variable to store the target value, and the value of this variable will be randomly generated. Create the variable by adding the following line of code below the slider value variable. While typing this, an import statement was added automatically. To see the import statement that was just added, scroll to the top of the file. Then click on the plus button beside the import text. And you can see the random class imports and other import statements used by this file. The log class and the activity main binding was also imported for us. Android Studio helps to import all these classes automatically. Now, breaking code into files and packages that we can import is very important in programming. Without the concept of import statements, all the code contained in those files would have to be inside this file, and this would result in a very long file and would prevent us from using these codes in multiple places in our project or in external projects. Okay, I'll close that up. The code we just entered creates a variable named target value, and the nextInt function of the random class generates a number in the range from 1 to 100. Next, to use this value inside your app's UI, you need to set the text of the target text view to the value of this variable. And you know the routine, right? First, you get the text view in the activity using view binding. Then, you set the text property to the value you want. Remember you did this in an earlier episode, so let's go ahead and do that now. Enter the following code inside the onCreate method of the main activity. In here, you set the text property or attributes, if you like to call it that, to the target value variable, which is going to be the random value in the range from 1 to 100. This makes sense, right? But why do we have an error? Go ahead and hover over the target value variable that we passed. You can see the error says that there's a type mismatch. It required a character sequence, but instead we passed in an integer value. If you recall from an earlier episode about strings, we stated that a string is a sequence of characters, so a string is expected here. But it makes sense for the target value to be an integer because we are generating a number in the range from 1 to 100. Now, the reason the text view requires a string is because the text property in text views are represented as strings in the UI. That's why if you look at the XML layout file, you will see the text attribute is surrounded with double quotes which represents a string. So, how do we pass in a string here when the target value must be a number? Well, if you look below the error pop-up, you can see a suggestion that says add to string call. Go ahead and click on it. This adds a toString method to the target value property. The toString function is available to all classes in Kotlin. This is simply because all classes in Kotlin have a parent class called any. And the any class has a bunch of functions just like toString, which can be used by classes that inherit from it like the int class. So, the int class has the function which returns the string representation of the integer object, in this case, the target value. Now, in simpler terms, The toString function here just wraps the target value in double quotes to make it a string so that the text view can accept that value. You'll be using the toString function as you code more and more in Kotlin. Okay, let's go ahead and try it out. Run your app. You can see a new target value is set. Restart the activity multiple times to see different values in the range of 1 to 100 generated as the target value.